So today, I'm going to talk to you about something that's a little more simplistic than the things that I tend to talk about. I like to talk about some heady topics sometimes, and mythology is a great love of mine and that sort of thing. But today we're going to talk about something that's a lot more relatable, as I'm sure everyone at some point in their life has dropped something. And we're going to talk about it in the metaphorical sense. So we're going to talk about the art of letting go. So, all of you, of course, are perfect manifestors in your life, and you've never run into any problems before, and it's all good. But we're going to talk about the theoretical people who have trouble with that. I'm going to go through 12 points that are very important when it comes to letting things go, okay? So the first thing is to understand the relationships you thought you would have are different than the ones that you actually have. So one of the biggest things we have trouble letting go of are our preconceived notions.
Yes.
So this stems from a point in our lives, or in the history of humanity, where we had to retain information about an environment, about a particular encounter that we had. We need to hold on to those things in order to survive when we meet them again. Whether it's these berries are poisonous or that animal is going to try and eat me, whatever it may be, those things are important for us to hold on to because they help us survive. They help us perpetuate our species. Now that we exist in a society, in a place that doesn't require us to run from predators constantly, we still unfortunately maintain that brain pattern. We still maintain those neural pathways. And so what you really need to do is when you're interacting with another person is understand that you're only going to be perceiving an aspect of this interaction, of this relationship. And when we use the term relationship, we're using it loosely. It's not necessarily just a romantic relationship. It can be a relationship of just someone that you just met, but this interaction between two people. So what happens is that when we are placed in a situation, we try to decipher body language, nonverbal cues, different things that happen throughout the result of our conversation. And so what happens when you open that up into interpretation is you run into the opportunity to be mistaken. Another thing to acknowledge is the idea of perception, because you can see things from various perspectives, and so if you're having a bad day, you might perceive someone as being hostile when they're not necessarily doing it intentionally. It's just the way that you're perceiving the particular interaction. So it's important to be aware of yourself as I am responsible for 50% of this interaction, and that's it. You can't control the way that they perceive you any more than they can control the way that you are perceiving them. So this interaction really is crucial when it comes to letting these things go. Another thing that's important is to keep gratitude and appreciation in mind when you're having any interaction, whether someone's screaming in your face or you're seeing an old friend that you haven't seen for quite some time and you're catching up. Because when we have gratitude for wherever we are in our lives, that fuels our journey to progress forward. Whereas if we're half listening to what they're saying and formulating in our mind what we're going to say back, we're not really being present with that person, and therefore we're far more likely to miss something. And the other important thing is to trust in the process, to understand that our world is full of imperfection, or what we perceive to be imperfection, because it might not line up with how we've constructed our perception of the world. However, those imperfections serve to teach us lessons. A beautiful realization that I had not that long ago was we tend to, especially in our community, talk about this idea of learning lessons. We have to graduate, right? And we're going to go from this class and move on to the next class. And oh, I can't wait for this lesson to be over. Well, I hate to break it to you, but the reality of this is you're not in school anymore, okay? Life's lessons are more accurately represented by a jump rope, okay? Life swings them at you, and it can trip you up, and you can fall flat on your face as many times as you'd like until you learn how to jump. It doesn't make the rope go away. It's still there. You just know how to work with it. All of us learn to walk at some point in our lives. We weren't born with that capability. We weren't born with those motor functions. So what happened at one point is we got up and we started walking, we fell over, and we could say, well, this walking thing isn't just for me. Or we can get back up and give it another college try. So that's the idea, is that when we go through these difficulties in life, they are indeed going to come up again. There is no way to push that off the table and say this is over and done with now. That's not the way that works. Now, another thing that I talk about a lot is dating the same person with 5 different faces. Right? Anything, right? None of you have done that, of course. So the idea of having the same relationship over and over and over again, it says, I don't know why I keep attracting these people to me, completely discounting the fact that there's one constant in all of those relationships, and it's you. Okay? So the idea is that if we take a second to look at the constant in whatever situation we're encountering difficulty, we're far more likely to get closer to the solution of that difficulty. So, that being said, appreciation is the final thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to those interactions. Because when we can appreciate where the other person that we're communicating with is at in their life, that's when we can be far more likely to meet them on their level, rather than saying, oh, these people, they just don't get it, right? Looking down on someone as if they're missing the point, okay? When you can show that compassion and understanding and appreciation for them, whatever they're bringing up for you, whether it's something you're familiar with or not, it allows you to be able to move forward with grace and love. So the second thing we're going to talk about is don't be invested in the outcome when dealing with others. Another easy one, right? Piece of cake. Every time you talk to somebody, who cares what they say? I'm going to apply for a loan. I don't really care what the bank has to say. It's no big deal, right? Whatever, yes. That's no problem. No problem. So the idea is that when we walk into a situation, again, we're going in with a preconceived notion. And we have to remember that expectations always breed disappointments. Because as soon as we expect something, we've stepped out of the now in our minds. We're still here, patiently waiting for ourselves to return. But as soon as we get into the realm of expectation, we step out of the now. And at that point, we have relinquished all of our power. Because we are in no more control of that future moment that we are projecting ourselves into than we are of the past moment that has already gone by. The only moment that we have any control over is the now. So when we can stay here in this moment, that's when we can find ourselves material to work with. Rather than going to the library to write a book, surrounding yourselves by all of these words that have already been written, saying, well, I was going to write that. Get yourself a blank piece of paper and write it down then. You can spend your whole life going around saying, well, I had this idea, or I was going to draw that picture, or I had this dream about this thing, and that's why this is all here. It's the idea nothing is new under the sun, okay? Every thought that you've had, every concept that's come to your mind has already existed in the past. And so you can allow someone to take that power from you by giving it to them, or you can say, well, I'm going to express my version of it. Because the one thing that you do better than everyone else is be you, for better or for worse, okay? So sometimes when we're putting ourselves in a position where we're not going to invest in the outcome of an interaction, sometimes that means maintaining respectful boundaries, okay? And so that says, when you walk into a situation, now, before I continue here, I do want to preface this with, nobody does this all the time, okay? Not a chance. Because when you step into a situation, inevitably, you're going to trigger that reptilian brain, that fight or flight mechanism that's in your mind. It's going to happen if you get into a conflict. There's nothing you can do about it, I'm sorry. Aside from taking the time to think about it first. Because the beautiful part is, it's not literally this way, but the layering of your brain, you have your reptilian brain on the inside here, and then the mammalian brain on the outside. It is indeed far larger, but that reptilian brain's a lot closer to your brain stem, okay? So it's going to get there faster. It can send a message real quick. But we can overpower that reptilian brain with our mammalian brain, with the part of us that has logic and reason and that can utilize our common sense. Because yes, it's easy to snap into that fight or flight mechanism and either fight somebody or get out of there, and it feels good when you win, right? But it's all a misconception. Because if you start fighting something away, guess what? That jump rope's going to swing right back around again, okay? So when you see a problem come up, say you're exhausted, you have no energy left to do anything, you've been busy, you've been working for 3 days straight, and you had to talk to all the worst people on the phone, all of this stuff, and you have no energy left to deal with life. That's okay. Because, again, that jump rope's going to come right back around again. You can consciously say, I can't deal with this right now. And life will say, all right, well, I'll see you, in 12 days. So that, or you can say, well, I'm going to give this a try, and even if I don't succeed, which of course is projecting yourself towards some version of success, whatever that may be in your conception of the situation, and then going through it, and whether you meet it or not, that's okay, because guess what? Life's going to be back in 12 days. So give it a shot, okay, when you encounter these situations. Now, maintaining respectful boundaries in an interaction. What that means is that you say, I'm okay with X, Y, and Z. For a lot of people who aren't introspective, meaning that you think about things within yourself a whole lot, people who aren't that way, or maybe you don't find yourself contemplating life. Now, that's very different than ruminating on life. If you're constantly spinning on the hamster wheel in your head, that's not getting a whole lot done, right? You're going a whole lot of nowhere and expending a whole lot of energy in the process. However, if you think about, this is what I tend to do in an interaction. That acknowledgement of what you do, especially for better, for worse, when you can look at those things and understand how you operate, that's when you can be aware of how you're behaving in a particular situation. Maybe you cross your arms a lot and kick your one leg out, right? And giving some people some sass, right? The idea is that when that happens, you're putting out this message to somebody. And you might not be doing it intentionally. It might just be just a pattern that you've perpetuated through your life. You can, using your mammalian brain, decide, hey, instead of crossing my arms and sticking my leg out, I'm going to keep my hands out of my pockets, available in front of me. I'm going to utilize body language to try and circumnavigate my normal pattern, okay? And that's something else we'll get to a few more steps down the line. Now, maintaining those helpful and respectful boundaries, sometimes writing them down can be very beneficial. Take a piece of paper and say, all right, I'm going to write at the top of the page a person that I get along with very well. Then write out all of the boundaries that you have. What's okay to discuss with that person? What's not okay to discuss with that person? Either for you or something that you know about them, that they don't like to broach this topic. Then move on to someone that might be a little agitating. Somebody that you can handle in short spurts, but any longer than that bothers you a little bit. Just a little bit. And write them down, same thing. Go through that situation. And then finally end on someone that as soon as you get near them, your oil and water, you separate immediately. You cannot stand their presence. Write down all of those boundaries. Then start to look at the things that are the same about you as that person. First, starting with the person that you get along best and working all the way to the person you can't stand. And I have a little bit of a spoiler for you. Chances are pretty darn good that when you get to the end of that list, the person that you can't stand, that similarity column is going to be a little shockingly long. Because a lot of times, the things that bother us the most about the world around us, the people around us, are the things that we exhibit ourselves. This isn't a new concept, I'm sure. But when you find yourself in that position to finally come to that conclusion, it can lead you to change a lot about your life or have the desire to change, and that's where we want to start. So other times when we end up in these situations where we don't want to be invested in the outcome of a situation, it means letting go, right? And that's what we're here for. We're here to talk about that. It's very difficult for us to let go of things, especially when it comes to our personalities or our perception of what our personality is. And the reason being that we have a tendency to identify by what we've survived. I've been through this. This was done to me. I grew up in this world, in this family, in this relationship. And I hate to tell you, but that does not define who you are. Not at all. In fact, I'm going to put a quote by Carl Jung up here. It's, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." It's a really interesting statement because logically it makes sense, well, obviously. However, when we apply this consciously, we can acknowledge the past. It's one of the common things that when I'm talking to someone about the concept of presence, right? Be here now. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. It's not literally that they disappear, okay? You're not developing willing amnesia of these moments, but you are applying yourself consciously to this moment only. Because any other energy expended in any other direction is a waste of that energy. So that's why when you can acknowledge what happened to you, but you are still in charge of what you become, what you do in that situation, how you interact. Even when the reptilian brain kicks in, you are still responsible for those things. So the third thing, don't live in chains when you hold the key. Piece of cake, right? So again, we put ourselves in these situations in life. We date that person for the 5th time, right? We find ourselves in interactions. People just always seem to get in my face, right? We put ourselves in these chains. We say, I can't step away from this person. I can't stop talking to them because what's going to happen if I do that? If I make this difficult decision, what's going to happen? I'm responsible for keeping after this very depressed person in my life, because if I don't, they might kill themselves. Are you in control of them or their actions? Absolutely not. Are you responsible for them or their actions? Absolutely not. Difficult, but true. It's the reality of life. But we still put ourselves in these situations. Now, once again, the beauty of free will is that you can choose to chain yourself to that person. You can choose to chain yourself to that situation. It is completely up to you. If you think the juice is going to be worth the squeeze, by all means, go for it. But it doesn't mean that it's going to work out the way that you expected it to. That's something that we talked about before, right? So, the other part is when we chain ourselves to ourselves, right? The idea that we create this reality. We chain ourselves to these self-limiting beliefs. And the only time they become true is when we believe them to be true, right? Because I use this all the time. If you've ever had a reading with me, chances are pretty good I've used this phrase, that I can call you a dolphin all day, but it doesn't make you grow flippers in a blowhole. Right?
Already have it.
Yeah, right, there you go. So that's the idea, that you get to see, again, that's where perception comes in. You do not become these things unless you say, that's who I am. So it doesn't matter what happened to you, whether someone told you for your entire life that you were a failure, you were a no good, worthless piece of life. Doesn't matter. Unless you apply that to yourself and say, I am a no good, worthless piece of life. Because, again, these things sit in our minds. They may very well influence our thought processes and our actions. However, we have the power to change them. We have the power to reroute the way that this brain works. It's a magnificent power, and it's one that we relinquish more often than not. So, number 4, let go of the idea that you can control others. So, another thing that I talk about quite a bit, control ends right here for me. I can influence you guys a lot. I can start throwing things at you, right? You could sit there and not do anything and get hit in the head, or you can move out of the way, right? I've influenced your decision making, but I can't control whether you move out of the way or stay still, okay? So, no matter what's going on around you, you are not in control of those things. Now, I know, again, this is a difficult thing for us to think about because none of us know anyone who's controlling, so it's a difficult concept to wrap our head around. But they're probably out there, these people, who are out there trying to control things. And of course, they're in perfect control of themselves the whole time. Right. So when we find ourselves in these situations where we're dealing with a controlling person, we can try and psychoanalyze them and say, oh, well, that's because they're out of control of this aspect of their life, or this is going wrong in their world. But the reality is, the moment that we do that, we're trying to control them. We're trying to put them in a box. Just in our minds, but nonetheless. However, when we use this little word called compassion, when we allow that to creep into our perspective, into our world, when we can show love towards someone who the average person might say doesn't deserve it, you're guaranteed to end up interacting with a different person. Because it throws a curveball at them. It's me chucking this pen into the crowd. That's not what you're expecting to happen. So they're not prepared for it. They're not prepared for compassion, for love from you. They're expecting you to fight fire with fire. So when you step outside of that realm of normalcy for their mind, for their usual social interactions and patterns, that's when you set them up for change. And that's when you set yourself up for the opportunity to change yourself. To say, oh, there is another choice here. There is another option.
Isn't that a form of control?
Ah, very good. But what happens is that what you're doing is setting up the control up here for yourself. You're changing the way, because you're creating fertile ground for them to change, rather than changing them.
Yeah.
But you're giving yourself the opportunity as well to make a different choice. That's where it all falls in. So the other way that we're going to talk about control, which is an interesting thing, is the need to please people. Okay? This is a form of control too. That I want to do what these people expect me to do, because that will make them happy. Right? We tend to look at control as manipulation in a negative sense of going to make them do something that they don't realize that they're doing. But you can flip it the other way. You can try and make them happy so that they don't know what's going on. So number 5 is the only concern yourself with what you think of yourself. Again, the dolphin analogy. The idea of you are who you are. Because no matter how people see you on a good day, a bad day, every day, it doesn't matter. They're only seeing a facet of you. They only see one little piece of who you are as a person. And so when you can relinquish that responsibility of, well, okay, but what are they going to think about this? What is this group going to think about this? What's Gabe going to think about this? That's when these difficulties come in. And then you find yourself being pulled in all these different directions, trying to satiate all of these people. And at some point in your life, you're going to end up with opposing camps, people on complete opposite sides. And then life says, now what are you going to do? So, to pull another quote, Gandhi said, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Essentially, taking all of your processes and aligning them to a purpose, to a goal. Now, speaking of goals, number 6 is leave room for mistakes. Again, another alien concept, since we all are beautiful people. When we encounter mistakes in life, when we inevitably head down a path and that path dead ends or drops off, we find ourselves in a position where we have to catch up, figure out what to do now. We can say, well, that was a waste of my life. That was a waste of 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years. But was it? Are you the same person now as the moment that you started that journey? Absolutely not. It's not possible. Not possible. So when you can let go, understanding that really in the macrocosm, looking at things from a wider perspective, there is no such thing as a mistake. It's not real. It's a learning opportunity. And again, remember, that learning opportunity is a jump rope, not a class. Because that learning opportunity will come back around again. You'll end up finding another dead-end path. It'll happen. But it's up to you to decide whether that means you want to keep walking or maybe jump around a little bit. Maybe it's time to stop walking on paths. How about that? Right? There's other modes of transportation. They're out there. So, an important caveat there is to take it easy on yourself in that process. Because again, we allow these voices to come back to our minds that say, see, I knew you couldn't do it.
I like Bob Ross's words with, there are no accidents, just happy little mistakes.
That's exactly right. Yep, that's a beautiful way to look at it. It sure is. Yeah, because that's the reality. It's an opportunity. Because if we constantly, another fun way to do it is the handwriting, okay? If you so happen to have a paper from when you first learned to write, and then you write those same words now, chances are pretty good the writing's going to be a little bit different, okay? And so those little shifts in the way that we write words, those little shifts in the way we write numbers, the way that we draw things, the way that we sketch things, whatever we do, something that small, the way that we pronounce things, all of those things are within the realm of our control. And when we make those little alterations, whether they're purposeful or accidental, it gives us a new opportunity. It allows us to grow. So, number 7 is accept the things you cannot change. Lots of change talk here. When we're faced with change, we very often stick to what's familiar, even if it's bad for us, even if it hurts us. We stick with it because new is scary. Change is scary. This is what we've programmed ourselves to believe. And it takes a lot of time, practice, and diligence to say new is exciting. New is full of opportunity. When we look at our lives, we don't tend to look at where we are right now. It's sort of a summation of past events, right? Because that's what we categorize as our lives. However, when we take the time to say, these people that I was in the past brought me to the moment that I am now, even beyond our physical self, we have generations that precede us that have fought through countless difficulties, some of which we will never know, to get us to this point. And so when we can think about things in that broad spectrum, this wide scheme, when we say, I was late paying the electric bill, is it really worth getting so depressed that you end up in bed for 2 days? When maybe 20 generations back, they're trying to figure out how to save their family from a plague. When they're trying to figure out where are we going to get food. Not because I can't make it up to Giant, but because there's no food, right? There's a lot that we can gain perspective through if we take the time to step back. And that's really the main thing. When it comes to letting go, the difficulty stems from our inability to step back. Because again, when this reptilian brain gets involved, it is hyper-focused on every possible cue it can find. It's the same part of your brain that likes to draw patterns with things. Like if you ever look at the front of a car and you see the lights are the eyes and the bumpers are the mouth, right? It's not really a face. It's not really there, except for the bugs that have eyelashes. So, it's not really a face, right? Our minds are connecting these dots, okay? And so what happens is that when we encounter these difficulties, we're putting ourselves in a position where we have to come up with a solution. We have no help. It's me. I have to figure it out. Even if everybody's like, here's something to help. No, I have to figure this out, right? People can be throwing life jackets at you and you're swimming away from them. This is getting in the way. I'm trying to figure out how to get out. Number 8, don't take yourself too seriously. Because no matter how serious the situation, even if you've just been diagnosed with a terminal illness, you are 100% definitely going to die. Well,
Someday.
we're all headed there, but none of us are getting any younger, I don't think. Unless anybody has a painting that's aging instead of memory. So, when we don't take ourselves too seriously, right, we give ourselves the option to not be stuck in that reptilian brain. That's when we can take the time to consider our options. That's when we can take the time to say, these relationships tend to be dragging me down. Or maybe this isn't the right person for me to talk to about this. Maybe this isn't something I should even be talking about at all, because maybe by talking about it, it makes me ruminate about it. When we laugh at what's going on in our life, just biochemically, we're giving ourselves a leg up. Because we're spiking our brains with endorphins that make us uplifted, that take us out of that reptilian brain into the mammalian brain, where we can make a logical decision rather than reacting to stimuli around us. Number 9 is do what scares you. And by that I don't mean walk downtown with a money suit on, but it means step outside of your comfort zone. Do something that doesn't feel right, okay? Again, within reason. I'm not endorsing any crazy behavior. I'm simply saying step outside of your comfort zone. It can be one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. And I speak from experience. Something, I know there's some new faces here, so I'll briefly dive into a little bit of my story. One of my things that I dealt with for most of my life was panic attacks, okay? And they were set on subconsciously, unbeknownst to me. I had no idea why it was happening, but but I would just be crippled by these panic attacks, and I tried to push myself through them. First started, my heart would race, and I'd say, whatever, I can deal with that. And then I started feeling sick, and I said, well, it's all right, I can work with that too. Just take a couple deep breaths, drink some water, I'll be fine. Then my legs started giving out, right? And then it progressed on and on until the point that one day I was walking down the hall, and I got tunnel vision. It got dark in my periphery, and then I couldn't see. I went completely dark for a couple seconds. I did pass out, luckily. I'm sure it would have happened. But eventually, I said, something's going on here. I have to try and figure this out. So I took the time to be in my own mind in those circumstances, in those situations. I tried to connect the dots. Couldn't figure it out, except for the fact that people were involved in all of those situations. Couldn't be that simple. Surprise, surprise, it was. It was people. I'm fine with people. Out here, but in here, nope. So I said, well, I've got a couple choices. I can either decide I'm going to take some drugs to deal with this. I could stay inside forever. That's always an option, right? I lived in the country at the time, so it was beautiful. The corn stalks are not threatening at all. So, or, that's right, well, yes, what's in the cornfield is a different story. Yeah, that's right. As long as it's not rustling, it's okay. Yeah. So I chose the last option, which was to go and expose myself to these social situations that were making me anxious, that were setting off these panic attacks. So I had my friend drive me to the Galleria, and I would sit in the food court. And he would sit at the table with me, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say, all right, where's my anxiety at? And it took me a while to figure out where it was, because I had pushed it down so much just to cope with everyday life. I had no idea. So I really had to focus on what was going on within me, until finally I realized, okay, I'm feeling about an 8 right now. I don't know why. I'm sweating profusely, but I feel fine. But I think I'm at an 8 right now. And so I would say, all right, this is it for today. And I'd get up and we'd leave. Then I'd come back the next week, and I'd be able to stay for a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, until I could sit there around all of these people screaming and running around and doing God knows what. And I was fine. I really was fine, both inside and outside. Now, did that make that anxiety go away? No. It's still here. If I sit and be quiet, I can still hear it up here. I can still feel it within myself. But just the same as when I went through and said, all right, here are all the things that I'm afraid of. I'm going to go one by one and try and get over these fears. It doesn't make them go away. You just learn how to work with them. You learn how to say, I'm not going to give my power to you anymore. That's the reality of it. So when you're letting go of something, it doesn't make it disappear. You're just learning how to jump rope. And eventually you do it so well you can do double dutch, right?
Do you think, like, when you're in a situation like you're describing, that to get out of your reptilian brain, just kind of do some things that might trigger your parasympathetic system, like deep breathing, like slow your breathing down, and maybe like physical, like when I would get panic attacks, the only way to get rid of them for me, I couldn't control the circumstances, I couldn't get out of my head, but I would do something that would be physically exhausting for me, and that helped me through them without medicine.
Yes, that's one of the ways to do it. Now, the only downside of doing something to just wipe yourself out is that you didn't learn how to jump the rope. You just kind of laid down and let the rope go over top, right? So the deep breathing is good, because what that does is that sort of counters this part of your brain that's saying, I'm in danger right now, and you're
Put you into the different.
and it's saying, no, everything is fine, I'm relaxed, see? And so eventually you can rewire your brain. Yes, so that definitely works. And again, tiring yourself out is absolutely an option. It's just a matter of progression, rerouting those neural pathways is very important when it comes to creating an alternate response to that stimuli. Absolutely, very good question. So, number 10, express what is working for you. So, how many people like to talk about themselves? Yeah, right? So, how many people can say, I am awesome?
I am.
Good. I'm glad to see some hands. Now, for the hands that aren't going up, what makes you not awesome? All the litany of problems that you have, right? All of the downfalls that you have. You associate those things and you say, the reason I'm not good enough is X, Y, Z. I know about these terrible thoughts that I have. I know about this thing that I do. I know that once everybody goes to bed, I go and sneak out on the porch and have a cigarette and not tell nobody I've smoked in 30 years, you know. These little things that we feel guilty about, they keep us from acknowledging our worth. So when we can step into a position where we can say, you know what, I am good despite the other things that I'm not necessarily proud about. When you can acknowledge what's working for you, when you can say, you know what, I connected these dots. And even if somebody says, well, yeah, obviously, didn't you watch Dr. Phil 3 years ago? We talked about that exact same thing. Well, you didn't watch that episode. You figured it out on your own. And that's the thing, is that if you acknowledge that value, acknowledge your capability to connect those dots, again, biochemically, you're going into your brain and saying, good job, right? I did it. And that encourages you to continue along that path. Continue to blaze your own trail, to find your own way, because you indeed have that capability. Number 11 is to allow yourself to feel negative emotions. Everybody likes that, right? And that's what we love to talk about. We love to talk about our negative emotions. Now, when it comes to our community of people in the metaphysical world, we tend to talk about the light, right? We focus on the light, on the positive energy. And when we do that, we automatically create duality in our mind, in our worldview. We say there is good and there is bad. There is light and there is dark. And I'm choosing the light. I'm choosing good. Now, there's nothing wrong with differentiation, with saying, this is a decision I would make, this is one I would not make. This is a decision I feel is made out of fear, this is a decision I feel is made out of love. Those are beautiful differentiations to make. But when we say, sometimes I get mad at people. Sometimes I get so mad I want to attack them. Right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with admitting those negative feelings. Nothing. Acting upon them is a different story. But admitting them won't get you sent to jail unless you shout them at someone. But the idea is that when we acknowledge that we are more than one-dimensional beings, when we are more than just good, just light, because no one is that way, not a soul on this planet, sorry. We all have both sides. And leave it to a Gemini to talk about that. So, when we ignore those feelings, we extend that suffering. That's the reality of it. Because when you deny these things, hide them under the bed, sweep them under the rug, eventually you end up with a lump in the middle of your room. Right? Your bed hovering off of the floor. Because the reality is, those things are a part of life. That stuff that we consider to be dark, that stuff we consider to be wrong, these thoughts that we have. Now, when we take the time in a healthy environment, in a healthy way, to explore that darkness, explore those perceptions of darkness, of what we perceive to be bad, When we explore that, we shed light on it. The very thing that we're trying to align ourselves with. However, when we ignore it, when we leave it in that corner, when we leave it under the rug, under the bed, guess where it's sequestered? To darkness. And all we feed it is more darkness. So, that being said, when we take the time to understand the things that scare us, when we take the time to look at the things that we perceive to be evil and wrong, and though we may or may not be able to relate, we may or may not be able to understand, when we take the time to explore them, to try and wrap our brains around as much of that concept as possible, it no longer is frightening. Because our primary fear is of the unknown. So as long as we stay uneducated, ignorant to a particular topic, a particular thing, that's when we feed more fear into that cycle. And it creates a feedback loop. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. When we're dealing with someone who screams in our face all the time, someone who has a short temper, somebody with a short fuse, okay? When we're dealing with those people, we can either choose to say, this is a terrifying silverback gorilla that is flying towards us with their fur standing up, beating their chest. Or we can say, this is a toddler crying in a baby crib. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's all how you frame it. Because if you understand where that aggression comes from, that aggression comes from fear, and that fear is coming from within them. When you can understand that fear, being scared, is at the root of all of that, it takes that power away, the power that you give it. You retain that power. You stay out of that reptilian brain, in a mammalian brain where you can say, ooh, they must be going through something right now. It's okay. You'll be fine, baby. Then, eventually, everything levels out. That's all good, right? And if not, then see you later. You move right along. So, finally, number 12 is learn forgiveness. One of my favorite Buddhist adages is that holding on to a grudge is like holding a hot coal waiting to throw it at someone. You're the only one being burnt. When we do this, when we hold on to these grudges, when we hold on to resentment, it locks us in the past. Who's ever had someone do them wrong? Realistically, who is? Everybody. Everybody has. We've all been in a situation where we said, what happened to me was not fair. Now, if I were to tell you, every single one of you, that whatever that thing was, whatever those circumstances were, it's okay. Now, you may feel, yeah, it's okay. But you also may feel resistance to that. No, it wasn't okay. They shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have said that. When you say it's okay, it does not absolve them of their sin. You are not saying everything is fine. What you did was acceptable. What you're saying is now they are okay. When you find yourself in a place that you can't move on, it's when you change yourself, like we talked about earlier. It's when you change yourself to a situation, to a person, and your unwillingness to step into a new world where you are no longer the victim of X, Y, Z. You are no longer the survivor of this circumstance or person. It leaves you with a very disturbing question. Who are you? Even if I wipe away everything that I've said so far this evening, and if I just say, who are you? Do you feel comfortable with letting go of everything that you've identified yourself by? Because your job, your family, the kind of clothes you wear, the kind of car you drive, the house you live in, none of that defines you. None of it. It's a very disturbing thing to think about, especially when you go that deep, especially when you live in consumer culture like we do, in a world where you are who you are because of what you have, because of what you can offer to the world around you. Yeah, I've got a pickup truck, I'll help you move. When we find ourselves in a situation where we say, I can't go into Walmart, I'm too sensitive, right? You can acknowledge these parts of yourself, but that's not who you are. So ask yourself, who are you? And we'll check back next year. So resentment and unwillingness to forgive locks you in the past. That's the bottom line. Now again, free will, wild card of the universe, it's out there for you. You can stay right where you are. You can identify by the fact that I overcame this thing, or I survived this particular harrowing experience. All good, all great. I'm not going to push you out of that, and neither is anybody else. It's the same thing that anybody who's ever had someone that they know that's dealt with addiction or gone through addiction themselves, you know that you cannot stop. You cannot quit for anyone but yourself. You can be inspired by the love of a child or a parent or a family member or a friend. Absolutely. But they cannot make you stop. Doesn't matter how hard you try, there is no magic combination. It is up to you to decide, I'm going to let this go. And that's what we're talking about. This goes from physical, chemical addiction in your body all the way through behavior patterns, which are rooted in chemical processes in your mind. The beautiful thing is neuroplasticity, the ability for your brain to rewire itself, is there as an option for you always, just like the present moment. It's always there for you to choose. Today is going to be the day that I choose something different. That I stop identifying myself by what I told everybody I am. And more importantly, the expectation that we place on ourselves to be the same today as I was yesterday. If all of a sudden I come in and I'm confident, if all of a sudden I can go to Walmart, everybody's going to ask me to go to Walmart for them. Right? I can't go in there. The idea is that you change from day to day. And just like your darkness, are you going to acknowledge it? Or are you going to ignore it? Are you going to say, I'm the same person? I am a love and light person, always and forever.
I think it's both, Matt, because you're gonna battle it up here for a little while till you've made that decision to stop fighting that battle up here.
That's exactly
Take the
right.
walk from here to here and be done with it.
That's right. And that's the day that you let go. That's the day when you say, I'm not going to allow these self-imposed concepts to chain me to this anymore.
Amen.
So, again, acknowledge the power of your mind. Understand that thoughts are just that, thoughts. That every single one of you are here tonight as the result of a thought. I'm speaking to you as the result of a thought. There's a lot of other things bouncing around in here that I could say. However, they stay up here. They stay up here, yeah. And so the idea is that these thoughts only hold power when we utilize them, when we put them into action. So when you have a negative thought in your mind, rather than, to use the old terminology, pray it away, acknowledge it and let it go. It's very similar to when I teach meditation to people. One of the first things that I talk about is people have a misconception that meditation is about clearing your mind. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's impossible. We are human beings with the monkey mind, as they say, right? Constantly thoughts are rolling around in there. They're supposed to. It's what your brain is made to do. It takes stimuli in, tries to organize it, and then gives you a readout. Okay? It's what it's supposed to do. But when you meditate, the process is like standing, it's like Lucille Ball, standing in front of the conveyor belt. And you watch it run down, right? And maybe you snatch one and eat one. But you watch them come and you watch them go. You see the thought come, you acknowledge it, and you let it go. Because what we do is we walk around with a bowl for a brain. We just gather everything, whether you need it or not, right? Yeah, who knows? I'll take that. I'll take that. What's going on? What happened to you? Give me that. Right? Would you say, oh yeah, I'll take that too. Okay. And then at the end of the day, we're sitting there swirling and we can't sleep. Right? We walk around gathering everything. But when we take the time to say, wait a minute, is this even mine in the first place? Chances are pretty good it's not. And we sit it down, that's when we can say, okay, these thoughts are mine and I'm going to choose how I put them into action. Rather than taking the expectations of others, the criticism of others, and applying that to our own lives. We can take the time to say, nope, that's not me. I'm not a dolphin. And then you move on with your human bipedal life, right? So, the next thing, as far as letting all of that stuff go, get it out. Okay? Yeah. And there's 1,000,001 different ways to do this, of course. You can talk about it. You can write about it. You can paint it. You can sing it. You can play it. You can do whatever form of creative expression. There's a very, very powerful ritual to use, which is where you take something that you want to let go of and write it on a piece of paper and you burn it. Okay? It is very beneficial because what it does is it not only creates this conscious separation in your mind because you light it on fire and you watch it go away. You can't put those ashes back together again. You can't rehydrate them. You are letting it go. And sometimes that's all it takes. That's the first step on that journey of actually releasing what's you're holding on to, what you want to let go of. Sometimes that's all it takes. And finally, accept it. Accept that life is the way it is right now. We can spend our entire lives chasing this ideal world, this ideal society, this ideal self. However, when we spend our lives in the pursuit, we very seldom get to the destination. It's like Yoda says, do or do not, there is no try, right? Leave it to the little green guy. So, the idea is that when we step into a situation, we look around and we say, all right, I can fix this, I can work with that, this is something I'm staying away from. And then you move into the circumstance, you move into the situation. That's you assessing it, that's all well and good, that's up here. But then as soon as you allow those thoughts to influence your action, that's when you start to surrender your power. Okay? That's when you start to hold on rather than let go. Now, this one is very, very difficult, especially for people when, one thing, before I started studying astrology, one of the things that I used to hear people say all the time is, I can't help it, I'm a blank. Right? That's basically saying, guess what? I'm stuck. I was handed this. I don't have any choice. Anyone who relinquishes themselves to that sentence, whatever you fill in the blank with, hopefully it's it's a zodiac sign and not a terrible word for yourself. But the idea is that when you fill in that blank and you surrender yourself to that, you're ignoring all the other planets that are involved, if you want to look at it purely astrologically. Okay? You've got your lessons. You've got your Saturn in there. You've got your Mars that motivates you to do things. There are all of these other forces at work. You're more than your sun sign. I'm sorry. Sorry you can't lean on that. But just the same as if you want to step outside of this archetypal world into what we would call everyday interaction, we have a tendency to justify our present by our past. It's just the way I was raised. Well, my parents brought me up this way, or I was in this difficult situation and so I learned this behavior. I got it from this person. I inherited it from that person. When you use the past to justify your present, you again relinquish your power. You say, I don't have a say in the matter. I can't do anything about it. However, when you take the time, again, to acknowledge your 50% of the interaction, you can see how much power you truly have. That's when reality peeks through. That's when you can see that what's actually going on is you're being face to face with a fear, the fear of responsibility, the fear that you get to choose, and not deciding is still making a choice. So when you end up in a situation where you find some difficulty, where you encounter some resistance, when you find yourself falling back on an old pattern, an old habit, you can either decide, I'm going to take responsibility for what I'm doing, whether I'm making a new decision or perpetuating an old pattern. When you make that decision, that's when you take your power. That's when you say, I'm going to let go of this excuse. I'm going to let go of this old habit. And give yourself the opportunity to do something different. So, there's a wonderful adage that says, when it rains, it pours, right? You're familiar with this? How this applies to letting go. Very often, what happens is we set up this framework where we deal with the present circumstances. We're dealing with boyfriend number 5 of 5, right? And we say, well, all I have to do is tell him it's over, right? And then he's going to be mad. They've all been mad. We've all had to deal with it. But at least he'll be out of my life, right? And then, lo and behold, again, here comes number 6. When we find ourselves in these circumstances where we're dealing with one situation, we have the opportunity to get rid of 5 all the way back to 1. That when we start to let go of one thing, sometimes we end up letting go of other things or having other things brought to the surface. Unfortunately, I can only think of a terrible analogy, but I'm going to use it because it's pertinent. As if you've ever cleaned the drain of your shower.
Oh.
Yes, I know, it's unpleasant. But you've got a few hairs hanging out, and you pull them, and that's not the end. And the one on top wasn't so bad looking, but everything else is very unpleasant. Right? This is what happens sometimes. However, once you go through it, guess what? Your drain actually works. Water goes down instead of pooling around you. Right? And your shower basin is not that deep. So it saves you from mopping every time after you take a shower. Now you have all of this time. So when you let go of things, sometimes other things come up. Sometimes you let go of other things in the process. And it's interesting because very often we'll end up creating this house of cards in our life. We'll stack these unstable things in a way that they are just as stable as they possibly can be. And then one day when we decide to get rid of something, Jenga, right? Everything topples. That's the energy astrologically of Pluto. Pluto comes in, it is an unstoppable force. And it's going, whatever you do. It's just going, it's not gonna stop. And so you can choose to either, just like a tidal wave, you can either choose to ride that wave into shore, and yeah, you might not make it in the process, or you can try and hold on to everything that you have and have that wave crash down on top of you and destroy everything. You can utilize that power by saying, these are things I no longer want. Take them away from me. You can throw that energy into it. You can utilize this, I'm getting rid of this in my life. One of the most important things that I can impart to you when it comes to letting things go, when it comes to change, don't wait for the new year to roll around. Because new year, same you. It's the way it works. Because what happens is we end up creating a pattern where when the new year rolls around, we make a decision, and guess what? The pattern isn't New Year's resolutions, it's breaking New Year's resolutions. That's what you're celebrating. That's the anniversary of, hey, guess what? We're going to break another thing, right? I'm on par. This is 33 years on the nose. So when we can understand that there's no better time than the present to let something go, and that we can take the steps necessary to throw everything that we want to get rid of onto that fire, that's when we can move on altogether. That's when we're no longer finding ourselves sitting in a place where we finally got rid of this one thing that was a thorn in my side, and everything else is still the same. Everything else is sitting around just the same as it was. When you've got that dumpster sitting in the driveway, get rid of it. Get rid of everything that you don't want. And sometimes when other things go along with them, even though you think you want them, let them go. Because ultimately, this moment is all we have. This is the only thing that we can work with. We only have control of ourselves. And when we fool ourselves into anything else, that delusion perpetuates, and it builds, and it builds, and it builds. And we find ourselves with our arms full of these perceptions, of these falsehoods that hold us, bind us, chain us to this reality. A reality that we don't want. A reality that is indeed an illusion that we have created. The last thing that's very important for me to talk about is forgiveness. The first person that you have to forgive is you. Now, when we let go of something, especially when it's something big, it's always a raw topic because it's been brought to the surface again. It's something that hasn't seen light for a very long time, and much like my trip to the beach recently, I was very sunburned from not being in the sun for quite some time. So these difficulties, when they're brought to light, sometimes it becomes painful. But when we forgive ourselves first, when we forgive ourselves for our shortcomings, for the things that we could not accomplish, for the mistakes that we made, for the things that we've said that we didn't mean, for the things that we didn't say that we wish we had. Especially when it deals with a finite situation, as they all are. But when someone passes away, and I didn't get the chance to tell them this, or I wish this hadn't been my last words to them, we can hold some resentment and anger towards that person because why did they have to start a fight with me that day? Why did we have to have this difficulty? Why couldn't they have just let me stay a couple more minutes because then I could have said what I needed to say? When you can forgive yourself first. I forgive myself for what I was not able to do. I forgive myself for what I have done. That's when you open the door. That's when you create the capacity to forgive someone else. Because just like you can't teach me how to swim if you do not know how, you cannot forgive another person unless you know how to forgive yourself. And forgiveness is just another word for love. Love. You cannot love yourself. You cannot love someone else unless you know how to love yourself. It's the ultimate reality of this existence. We can find ourselves in a world where we hold everything close to us. I'm not scared. I love these things, so I want to keep them safe. That's fear. Fear masquerading as love. But when we say love, I am grateful for these things now, in this moment. That's when we can truly recognize their value. That's when we can truly utilize everything in our lives, regardless of the situation that we're in. Eventually, when, for those of you who were brought up in a large family, as I was, I can recall every summer I would go away to the ocean with my whole family, and we stayed in this little tiny place with all of my cousins, and we would be lined up like sardines in sleeping bags on the living room floor, and we had a blast. These children didn't realize how uncomfortable it was because we were far more flexible at the time. But the idea is that now, as we've gotten older, you get to the point where you only see people at weddings and funerals because everybody grows up, they go their separate ways. And so the only time you meet people, you get to see them again, aside from Facebook and such, which is a nice way to keep in touch nowadays, but you end up with these difficult situations when it's a funeral, of course, hopefully not a wedding, but when you end up with these difficult situations where the overtone is unfortunate. It's sad we've lost this person. But we can be grateful that, hey, it's good to see you again. Right? Again, when we can be present in that moment, when we can be present with that person, that's when we can say, regardless of the situation, this is what I'm grateful for. Just the same as right now. I'm grateful that each and every one of you is here. This is a wonderful thing for me. I'm very grateful to you all, each and every one of you, for being here. Because by being here in this moment, not only am I able to share some of my perspective with you, but you are here to share your perspective with me, whether you speak or not. Because as I look around the room when I'm talking about someone or something, I can see each and every one of your faces. And how you share back to me through those invisible, nonverbal cues is you offering your perspective. And all of that is a wonderful thing. Now, when we find ourselves in a place of compassion, when we finally are able to let go, we see that not only does the world open up, not only are we afforded infinite possibilities, but there's always that knock of the past. How many of you have had a moment of clarity, a moment that seems enlightening, right? Okay? I hope more of you than have raised your hand at those moments. The thing that always jars us out of that is when we encounter a bump in the road, a difficulty. Something steps up and gets in the way again. We're reminded that, guess what? Life was great on that cloud that you were just floating on, but it's time to get back to work here at the grocery store. Okay? And the adage of before enlightenment carry water, after enlightenment carry water, applies to so many other aspects of life. That when we're encountered with any difficulty, regardless of the past, regardless of our previous interaction with someone, when we can approach them with compassion and love. When we can say, I don't know what's going on in your life right now, even if you're presently telling me about what's going on in your life right now. I don't know what's going on. And therefore, I am going to treat you with the same love and compassion that I would wish to be treated with. When you share that love and compassion, regardless of whether they seem open to it or not, they receive it. And whether it affects them now or like a time bomb in 20 years, that compassion serves as the catalyst for them to have the opportunity to change. It's very interesting. One of the most freeing things that some people hear, whether it's through getting a reading, or talking to a therapist, or just discussing with a friend, saying, you don't have to be that anymore. You don't have to be angry anymore. You don't have to be hurt anymore. You don't have to be an addict anymore. Receiving those words, that permission, something that they were unable to give to themselves. When they receive that gift, whether it makes sense at that moment or not, what seems to us to be perfectly obvious, when they receive that gift, sometimes it can open a door. It can open a possibility for them to change, for them to shift, for them to grow. And that's really what letting go is all about. It's about creating a world that you can let go of everything that is not you. And there's a lot of it out there. And afford other people the opportunity to do the same. To find yourself in a place of compassion and love that is this moment now. And not only to experience yourself, but also to share it with every person that you meet. When you can let go of the past and be here now. When you can let go of your pain and your hurt and all of the things that you feel make you up, that you have to hold on to because if I let this go, who am I? When you can just be love. When love is all you are everything.